Got a Friend is just one of the songs that have made James Taylor a legend. He's been at it more than 50 years, and when we visited a few months back, we found him both reflective and restless.
He was the soft-spoken poet of the 1970s, the voice behind songs that defined an era, and the man whose music turned pain into beauty. With hits like Fire and Rain and You've Got a Friend, James Taylor didn't just sing, he comforted, he healed, and he gave words to emotions millions couldn't express. But behind that gentle voice and timeless success was a man carrying battles most never saw. Now, at 77, the life James Taylor leads is far from the picture-perfect ending fans once imagined. Join us as we uncover the journey, the struggles, and the heartbreaking truth of how James Taylor lives today. Before the fame, the troubled roots of James Taylor. James Vernon. Taylor's story began on a cold March morning in 1948, inside Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. His father, Isaac Taylor, was a young resident physician from a prominent Southern family, and his mother, Gertrude, was an aspiring opera singer with dreams that reached as high as her voice once did. Before marriage, she had studied under Marie Sundelius at the New England Conservatory of Music, but after she married Isaac in 1946, her stage lights dimmed, replaced by the steady rhythm of family life. James was the second of 5 children. His siblings, Alex, Kate, Livingston, and Hugh, all carried a touch of that same creative spark, and for a time, music seemed to be the family's unspoken language. But it was James who turned that language into something timeless. In 1951, the Taylors traded the bustle of Boston for the quiet red soil of Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Isaac had accepted a job at the University of North Carolina's School of Medicine, and soon the family settled in the Morgan Creek area, surrounded by fields, trees, and endless stillness. Years later, James would remember it not through faces or conversations, but through the texture of the land itself, the clay-colored earth, the smell of changing seasons, and the kind of silence that makes you listen to your own thoughts. It was this world that would one day inspire Copperline, his nostalgic ode to the place that raised him. While his father's career soared, eventually becoming the dean of the medical school, he was often away, serving in the military or on expeditions like Operation Deep Freeze in Antarctica. That left Gertrude to hold the fort, guiding her children through the lonely stretches of time when Isaac was gone. Summers were spent on Martha's Vineyard, where the Taylors found peace by the ocean, and built the kind of memories that would later show up in James's lyrics. It was in North Carolina that James first picked up a cello, learning structure and patience from its deep, moody tones. But when he discovered the guitar in 1960, everything changed. Drawing from hymns, carols, and the folk sounds drifting through his childhood, he developed a unique style that blended the rhythm of the cello with the storytelling soul of folk music. He once explained that his guitar playing was like a piano, with his thumb taking on the left hand's bass notes, while his fingers carried the melody. Summers on Martha's Vineyard also introduced him to a kindred spirit, Danny Korchmar, a fellow teenage guitarist with a love for blues and folk. The two became inseparable, jamming in coffeehouses as Jamie and Cooch. Korchmar would later recall that James had a natural phrasing, a gift for making every word fall exactly where it belonged. Even as a teenager, his voice carried something rare, emotion that didn't need effort. But beneath the easy charm and musical instinct was a boy who felt the weight of expectations pressing in. In 1961, James enrolled at Milton Academy, a prestigious preparatory school in Massachusetts. Though intelligent and talented, he struggled to fit into the rigid, competitive environment. His headmaster would later describe him as sensitive and less goal-driven than others, a soul too soft for the pressure around him. After a rough junior year, James returned home to Chapel Hill hoping for some balance. There, he joined his brother Alex's band, the Corsairs, later called the Fabulous Corsairs, and started playing electric guitar. They even recorded a single in Raleigh featuring James's early song, Cha-Cha Blues. But soon after, the same restlessness returned. His old friends had moved on, and when he went back to Milton for his final year, he felt completely disconnected. By his late teens, the cracks had deepened. The bright boy from Chapel Hill was losing sleep, losing interest, and eventually losing control. Depression settled in like a fog, and soon he was spending up to 20 hours a day in bed. His grades fell apart, his motivation vanished, and he felt like he was living a life meant for someone else. In late 1965, he checked himself into McLean Hospital in Belmont, Massachusetts, a psychiatric facility that would become both a turning point and a sanctuary. There he found structure for the first time in years. The days were orderly, measured, and predictable, giving him the grounding he desperately needed. Doctors treated him with chlorpromazine, and in that slow, steady environment, he began to piece himself back together. When the Vietnam War draft loomed, James appeared before the Selective Service System, accompanied by 2 McLean aides, pale and withdrawn. He was deemed psychologically unfit for service, a decision that saved him from the battlefield but couldn't shield him from the wars inside his own head. He eventually earned his high school diploma from the hospital's Arlington School in 1966, a small victory in a life that felt uncertain. Looking back, he often described his 9 months at McLean as a lifesaver, a reprieve from a world that had become too heavy to handle. His siblings, Livingston and Kate, would later seek help there as well, their shared struggles connecting them in a quiet, painful way only family could understand. James never saw his mental health as a flaw. Instead, he accepted it as part of who he was. He once reflected that his feelings, those deep, uncontrollable emotions, weren't something separate from him but woven into the very fabric of his being. And maybe that's why his songs would later sound the way they did, raw, honest, and trembling with truth. Because long before James Taylor became a name the world sang along to, he was just a boy from North Carolina trying to make sense of the noise in his own mind and somehow turning it into music that still heals hearts today. James Taylor, career breakthrough and drug addiction. Fresh out of McLean and searching for direction, James Taylor tried to start over. At his friend Danny Korchmar's urging, he enrolled at Elon University for a semester, a small attempt at normalcy. But the pull of music and New York City was stronger. Before long, he packed up and moved to the city that never sleeps, hoping to carve out a life with his guitar and a dream. In New York, Taylor reunited with Korchmar and formed a band they called The Flying Machine, a name he chose because he refused to let the group be named after him. The lineup was tight: Joel O'Brien on drums, Zachary Wisner on bass, and Taylor at the center, quietly crafting songs that mirrored his inner battles. Many of his lyrics came straight from his time in McLean. Raw, confessional pieces like Knocking Round the Zoo, Don't Talk Now, and The Blues Is Just a Bad Dream. They performed at the Night Owl Cafe in Greenwich Village, sharing stages with rising acts like the Turtles. But fame didn't come knocking. Behind the small glimmers of success, James was slipping. The New York scene was wild and restless, and heroin soon crept into his world. Korchmar watched helplessly as his friends spiraled, while James later admitted that in New York, he learnt a lot about music and too much about drugs. Still, The Flying Machine gave it one last try, recording Night Owl and Brighten Your Night with My Day. The single got some radio play around the Northeast, but it stalled nationally, peaking at number 102. Jubilee Records, unimpressed, refused to fund a full album. A disastrous unpaid gig in the Bahamas was the final blow. The band fell apart, and years later, Taylor would immortalize the loss in Fire and Rain, turning failure into timeless art. By then, James was lost again. His addiction had deepened, and he drifted through New York, crashing in small apartments and parks, clinging to music as his only lifeline. When money ran out and his manager vanished, he called home in desperation. His father, Isaac Taylor, drove through the night to bring him home to North Carolina. James was pale, broken, and barely holding on. That rescue saved his life. For 6 months, he focused on recovery and even underwent surgery to repair his strained vocal cords. When he finally emerged, it was with a quiet resolve to start again, this time on his own terms. With a small inheritance, James made a bold choice. In late 1967, he left America for London, hoping distance would help him heal and rediscover himself. He stayed in Notting Hill and Chelsea, writing songs and recording demos. Then came the twist of fate that would change everything. His friend Korchmar introduced him to Peter Asher, former half of Peter and Gordon, now head of AANDR at the Beatles' Apple Records. Asher was blown away by James's demo, especially Something in the Way She Moves, and played it for Paul McCartney and George Harrison. Both were equally impressed. McCartney reportedly described him as great, and just like that, history was set in motion. James Taylor became the first non-British artist signed to Apple Records. He always credited Asher for opening the door and recognizing his potential. Under Asher's direction, he recorded his debut album, James Taylor, at Trident Studios between July and October 1968, the same period the Beatles were working on the White Album. McCartney and Harrison even contributed to Carolina in My Mind, which included the line, "Holy host of others standing around me," a nod to the Beatles themselves. Harrison, inspired by James's work, later borrowed the phrase, "something in the way she moves," for his own legendary song, Something. The album James Taylor was released in late 1968 to strong reviews, with Rolling Stone's John Landau calling it the coolest breath of fresh air. But success came with shadows. During recording, James relapsed into heroin and methadone use, leading to another round of treatment in Britain, then New York, and eventually at the Austin Riggs Center in Massachusetts. Unable to tour or promote the album, sales suffered, though Carolina in My Mind quietly hinted at his brilliance. By mid-1969, Taylor was ready to perform again. He took the stage at the Troubadour in Los Angeles and later at the Newport Folk Festival, where fans stood in the rain to hear him sing. His set was cut short by the Apollo 11 moon landing announcement, but the impression he left was lasting. Not long after, tragedy struck again. While visiting Martha's Vineyard, he was in a motorcycle accident that left both his hands and feet broken. Months of recovery followed, but even in pain, his creativity didn't stop. When he could finally write again, he signed with Warner Brothers Records, determined to rebuild his life from the wreckage. After healing from his injuries, James headed west to California, ready for a second chance. Keeping Peter Asher as his manager and producer, he began recording his second album, Sweet Baby James, in December 1969. With Carole King on piano, the sessions carried a quiet magic. When the album dropped in February 1970, it hit like a wave. The world finally caught up with the voice that had been waiting to be heard. The single Fire and Rain became the anthem of that moment, a haunting reflection on addiction, loss, and the suicide of his friend Suzanne Schneur. It climbed to number 3 on the Billboard charts, and the album soon sold over 3 million copies in the US alone. Critics hailed it as a folk rock masterpiece, intimate and emotionally charged. It earned multiple Grammy nominations and later landed on Rolling Stone's list of the greatest albums ever made. At the height of his fame, Taylor expanded his reach. He appeared in the road film Two Lane Blacktop and lent his voice to causes that mattered, performing alongside Joni Mitchell and Phil Ochs at a 1970 Vancouver benefit that helped launch Greenpeace. By early 1971, he was everywhere, from the Johnny Cash Show to Time magazine's cover, which called him the face of new rock. With his soft curls and calm intensity, fans saw in him a quiet hero of a restless generation. Then came Mudslide Slim and the Blue Horizon in 1971, featuring Carole King's You've Got a Friend. With Joni Mitchell on harmonies, the song soared to number 1 and earned James his first Grammy for Best Pop Vocal Performance. King took home Song of the Year. The follow-up single Long Ago and Far Away was another success, and the album sold over 2 million copies. But even amid the glory, his personal story began to take center stage. In November 1972, he released One Man Dog, recorded largely at his home with guests like Linda Ronstadt, Carole King, Carly Simon, and John McLaughlin. Though it reached the top 10, its experimental tone left audiences divided. Yet away from the critics, James found something lasting. That same month, he married singer-songwriter Carly Simon in a quiet Manhattan ceremony. Together, they became one of music's most celebrated couples. They performed together, appeared on each other's albums, and recorded duets like Mockingbird and Devoted to You. In 1974, they welcomed their daughter, Sally, and 3 years later, their son, Ben, both future musicians. It was a golden era for James Taylor, His career was soaring, his home filled with love and music, and the world finally understood the man behind the voice. But as always with James, every triumph carried a shadow, and just beyond the light of success, another battle was waiting. The one relationship that defined James Taylor's life. They were the golden couple of the 1970s, the kind of love story people believed only existed in lyrics and dreams. Carly Simon and James Taylor weren't just singers. They were storytellers whose songs mirrored their own hearts, full of tenderness, chaos, and truth. Together they were magic. Apart, they were tragic. And though their marriage ended decades ago, the echo of their love still lingers in every note they left behind. Their story began like something written in the stars. One day in early 1971, Carly Simon was walking down the street with her sister when she stopped in front of a newsstand. On the cover of Time magazine was James Taylor staring back at her. Without a second thought, she declared, "I'm going to marry him." Years later, she would write in her memoir, Boys in the Trees, that she couldn't explain how she knew. It was as if fate had whispered it to her, and maybe it had. Both came from musical families and had spent summers on Martha's Vineyard, though they were years apart and their paths never quite aligned. James once recalled seeing Carly perform there with her sister Lucy when he was just 14. She was 18, older, confident, and radiant. He found her beautiful but unreachable. Years later, fate brought them back together. In April 1971, Carly opened for Cat Stevens at the Troubadour in Los Angeles. After the show, her dressing room filled with people, but when the crowd thinned, she noticed James sitting quietly on the floor. He had that calm, magnetic presence that seemed to pull the world toward him. Carly described him as the center of everything, the stillness inside the storm. They exchanged a few words before Joni Mitchell, his girlfriend at the time, appeared to collect him. It was brief, but it left a mark. Months passed, but Carly couldn't stop thinking about him. She played his album Sweet Baby James every single day. Then in November that same year, she went to see him perform at Carnegie Hall. During intermission, she was invited backstage. Standing face to face again, she made a bold offer. "If you ever want a home-cooked meal while you're in New York, I'd love to make lunch for you." James smiled and replied, "What about tonight?" That night, instead of a proper meal, they shared 2 loaves of banana cake in Carly's apartment. A quirky, perfect beginning to a love story that would soon consume them both. From that moment on, they were inseparable. Carly was the one who first mentioned marriage. One morning, she suggested it casually, and James dismissed it. He told her they didn't need to marry to prove their love, but by afternoon, he changed his mind. "Maybe we should get married," he said. When Carly asked what changed, he smiled and replied, "This afternoon it was my idea." They married on November 3, 1972, in her Manhattan apartment. The ceremony was small, intimate, and almost secret. Carly was 30. James was 26. It wasn't extravagant, but it didn't need to be. To them, love was enough. They became one of the most admired couples in music, 2 beautiful souls whose art seemed to complete each other. Together, they wrote, performed, and recorded songs that defined an era. They had 2 children, Sally and Ben, both of whom inherited their parents' musical gifts. On stage and in interviews, they looked like a dream. But behind closed doors, the cracks began to show. Carly would later describe their relationship as bipolar, a roller coaster of love and fury that shifted from passion to resentment in a heartbeat. At the heart of their troubles was James's long battle with addiction, something Carly admitted she hadn't truly understood when they married. "It confused me," she said. "There was a wall between us that I couldn't see through." Her memoir revealed moments that were hard to read, like the night James injected heroin in front of her. He told her it would break the secrecy of his habit, that she needed to see what he was battling. "I can't have you in the habit at the same time," he told her. "You have to watch me." It was the kind of love that hurt to witness, a love she wanted to save but couldn't. James later admitted that his addiction destroyed not just his health, but also his relationships. "You can fall in love," he reflected, "but if one of you is addicted, it won't work. The whole person isn't available." He believed marrying an addict was like being with someone who didn't even know himself. Carly understood that, but she didn't believe addiction was their only problem. In her view, if it hadn't been drugs, it would have been something else. Their love was also tested by betrayal. Both admitted to being unfaithful, but it was Carly's alleged connection to Mick Jagger that nearly derailed the marriage before it began. On the eve of their wedding, Bianca Jagger reportedly called James to warn him that Carly had been unfaithful. Carly later confessed there had been an attraction but denied a full affair. James told Bianca he trusted Carly and went ahead with the wedding. In later years, James himself had affairs. One of them, Carly wrote, led to him setting up a separate home with another woman while still living with his family. She once confronted his mistress, whom she called Evie, in a moment of painful desperation. By 1981, the marriage had fallen apart. They were living separate lives, trying to keep things civil for their children. Carly told an interviewer that they had realized their love was no longer repairable. "Hopefully we'll stay friends," she said. But that hope faded too. Their divorce was finalized in 1983, and though both moved on professionally, personally, they drifted into silence. Aside from a brief reunion in 1995 at a charity concert, they have never reconnected. Carly has spoken openly about how difficult that distance has been, especially while raising their children. She once said James had put up an iron curtain, refusing to communicate with her. Still, she spoke of him with deep affection. "I love him," she admitted. "He's fascinating and brilliantly talented, and he's the father of my children. How could I not love him?" Yet there was sadness in her words, a kind of acceptance that love sometimes doesn't survive the person you share it with. James, on the other hand, has always been more guarded. When asked about Carly's claims, he simply replied that divorce means going separate ways. He said they had once communicated well for the sake of their children, but eventually it all ended. "Carly was important to me," he acknowledged quietly, but it did end. Looking back, he called their marriage doomed from the start. "I was unfit to be a husband and father," he admitted. Today, when fans listen to "You've Got a Friend" or "Fire and Rain," they hear more than music. They hear two people who loved deeply but couldn't outrun their own shadows. Carly Simon and James Taylor's story wasn't a fairy tale. It was real, raw, and human. And maybe that's why it still hurts. Because even now, when their voices play through old speakers, you can feel it. The kind of love that burns bright, fades slowly, and never truly disappears. But love wasn't the only battle James faced once the music faded. Beyond the heartbreak and the years of quiet reflection, another storm was brewing. One that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with justice. After decades of shaping the sound of modern folk, James Taylor found himself standing up against a giant that had once helped build his career. James Taylor's lawsuit with Warner Brothers. James Taylor, the voice behind timeless classics like Fire and Rain and You've Got a Friend, may be known for his calm melodies and gentle storytelling, but behind the scenes, the singer wasn't staying quiet when it came to money owed to him. In one of the most surprising legal moves of his career, Taylor took on one of the biggest names in the music business, Warner Brothers Records, over millions in unpaid royalties. According to reports, Taylor filed a lawsuit in Los Angeles Superior Court, claiming around $2 million in damages. His complaint wasn't just another celebrity money grab, it was part of a growing wave of musicians demanding justice over how record labels handled digital income, especially from iTunes and streaming platforms. Taylor's story began decades earlier, back in 1969, when his production company signed a distribution deal with Warner Brothers' predecessor. The deal was amended in 1972, setting up two very different royalty systems. When records were sold, Taylor earned between 10 and 12%, but when music was licensed, he was supposed to receive half 50% of the net receipts. At the time, this made sense for vinyl and radio, but no one could have predicted a world where people bought songs with a single click on their phones. By the late 70s, Taylor had left Warner Brothers for Columbia Records, but the ties between him and his old label didn't disappear completely. In 1979, both sides agreed to a termination and settlement that ensured he would continue receiving payments and have the right to audit Warner's accounting. Then, in 2002, another amendment was made to allow a new greatest hits album and remastered versions of his classics. But according to Taylor, Warner never released those albums. and the new agreement didn't even apply to the issues at hand. So in 2008, Taylor exercised his right to audit. What he found sparked the fire. Two separate audits uncovered a series of underpayments that added up quickly. There were missing foreign receipts, questionable deductions on compilation albums, and even smaller ticket discrepancies that didn't add up. But the most shocking discovery was how Warner handled revenue from digital downloads. Taylor's audit revealed that the label had been treating digital downloads as sales instead of licenses. Why does that matter? Because that difference cuts his share down to almost a fraction of what it should be. The dispute centered on whether Taylor should be splitting profits equally with Warner whenever one of his classic songs like Carolina in My Mind or Sweet Baby James was downloaded on platforms like iTunes or Verizon. To make things worse, Taylor claimed that Warner shortchanged him in other areas too, including proceeds from its massive $110 million settlement with Napster. He reportedly received only 0.24% instead of the expected 0.33%. It might sound like a small difference, but when millions are involved, that's a serious cut. Taylor's case wasn't happening in isolation. He joined a list of major artists who had also taken legal action over similar digital royalty issues. Names like Kenny Rogers, Rick James, Rob Zombie, Peter Frampton, and even Eminem's producers, who won a landmark case in 2010 that set a new legal precedent for how downloads should be treated. For years, Warner and Taylor had gone back and forth over the issue. They even entered into a tolling agreement in 2010, essentially pressing pause on the statute of limitations to buy more time to resolve things. But when the extended deadline hit in 2012, Taylor had had enough. He officially filed his lawsuit, accusing Warner Brothers of breaching their agreement and causing a financial dispute that had ballooned to $2 million. The lawsuit, led by his attorneys Paul Duvall and Richard Bush of King & Ballo, became one of the defining moments in the ongoing fight between artists and record labels in the digital age. For Taylor, a man whose songs often spoke of love, loss, and finding peace, this battle showed another side of him, the artist who refused to let corporations rewrite the value of his legacy. And in a way, it raised a bigger question for the entire industry. When the world changes, who gets to decide what an artist's worth really is, the musician who made the music, or the label that sold it? James Taylor is 77. How he lives now is just sad. At 77, James Taylor lives a life far removed from the whirlwind of fame that once surrounded him. The man who once defined an era with his soft-spoken voice and soul-deep lyrics now spends his days quietly, reflecting on a career that spanned more than half a century. And though he still performs and records, there's a stillness to his world now, a kind of bittersweet calm that feels both peaceful and sad at the same time. After nearly 45 years of waiting, Taylor finally reached a milestone many thought had long passed him by. In 2015, his album Before This World debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 chart. It was a full-circle moment, his first chart topper since Sweet Baby James back in 1970. Selling 96,000 copies in its first week, it was proof that time had not dimmed his magic. But even then, it felt like a quiet victory, one earned through patience rather than momentum. Taylor's later years have shown flashes of the old fire. He canceled a planned concert in Manila back in 2017 to protest the wave of extrajudicial killings in the Philippines, a move that reminded the world that his heart had never stopped caring. In 2020, he released Breakshot, My First 21 Years, an intimate audio memoir that peeled back the curtain on his struggles, his music, and the long road toward healing. That same year, his album American Standard reached #4 on the Billboard 200, earning him yet another Grammy, proof that his voice still carried power. He performed alongside Carole King in 2022 and still tours even now, in 2025. But watching him today, older and more fragile, there's an unmistakable sense of nostalgia, a reminder that even the brightest stars, with time, begin to fade quietly into the twilight. What James Taylor song is your favorite till this very day? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You'll enjoy it.